So today's podcast guest is Daniel Kokotajlo, author of the bombshell essay AI 2027 and former governance researcher at OpenAI. Presumably, many of you listening to this have already heard of AI 2027. It's an incredibly well-researched and quite pessimistic vision of what might happen in a world where AI capabilities continue to accelerate, intertwining with US-China competition, recursive self-improvement, major misalignment, and also job loss. I recommend that you all go read it at ai-2027.com if you want to read the full scenario. So Daniel, along with his authors, Eli Lifland and Sky Alexander, have already done a number of really excellent podcasts and blog posts where they discuss and debate their specific predictions. I recommend, for example, the Dorkesh episode or the Ross Douthat episode if you just want an overview of what the project is and a little bit of debate about predictions in it. And I will say that regardless of however much you do or don't agree with their particular forecasts, I think it takes tremendous balls, and I really respect the fact that they actually put out these very specific and very falsifiable predictions out there. So I really appreciate that. For today's conversation in this podcast, we'll talk a little bit less about the specific predictions and much more about the value of scenario forecasting as a method, both a method of truth seeking as well as a method of advocacy. There are many ways they might have chosen to present their research. As someone who does a lot of writing in media, I think theirs is quite effective. And I just want to learn more about that. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for that warm intro. I'm super excited to talk about those questions. Basically, I've done a bunch of podcasts about AI 2027 and what we said, and my background and things like that. But we are genuinely hoping to inspire lots of other people to write scenarios about the future of AI. And let's get into it.
Amazing. Yeah, I think I'm hoping to host my own little workshop in San Francisco at some point. So I'll probably include a little form in the Substack post for anyone who wants to sign up for that.
Awesome.
So maybe we could start with, what was the first scenario forecast that you ever wrote?
So way back in the day, like in 2019, I had just started, basically was leaving grad school. And I started a job at AI Impacts, which was a small think tank that tries to predict the future of AI. And we did this vignettes workshop. We tried to have scenarios depicting what the future might be like. And I totally forget what I wrote in that scenario.
Is that one the what 2026 looks like, or is that an even earlier one?
That was 2 years later. So what 2026 looks like, I wrote in 2021.
Okay. And was that the first one that you did that had some sense of real impact, or where you realized that it was fun and valuable? Or
wait a minute, hold on, my memory is wrong. I think that what 2026 looks like might have been evolved out of the AI Impacts workshop. So
that's what it said at the top of the restaurant post.
Yeah, you're totally right, actually. Yeah, so I must have started at that workshop and then later expanded it and turned it into its own standalone blog post.
Oh, yeah. How did you write that one? What was the process of the vignettes workshop? Because I'm curious how your approach to scenario forecasting has evolved since then.
Well, as you can tell, my memory is pretty rusty about what that vignettes workshop was like. I think we put out an advertisement, and I think it was a remote event, and we just had a bunch of people, and we were like, okay, we're starting the timer now. Let's all write our little stories for what we think the future is going to be like. One thing that I noticed is that I think people interpreted it very differently. Some people like me tried to sort of make it be an actual timeline that starts in the present and then has events with dates attached. But a lot of other people interpreted it more as a fiction writing exercise. And so they had a character, and it was all about a day in the life of, Jasmine in 2035 talking to her AI husband or whatever. There are people who took it in completely different directions and sort of treated it more like an ordinary fiction writing contest. And then there are some people like me who are treating it as more like a forecast of here's what happens in these dates.
What do you think is the difference between a scenario forecast and a piece of speculative fiction? Because I've seen criticism that's this is just sci-fi.
Most fiction is written to be entertaining, or it's written to prove some sort of point in an argument. And I think it's valuable to at least try to actually just predict what's going to happen. So that's, I think, the sort of central difference that has a lot of downstream effects on a lot of other things. Like AI 2027 and what 2026 looks like, they were sort of my best attempt at actually guessing what's going to happen. They were not trying to entertain anyone. They were not trying to prove, that we're all going to die or anything like that. Now they do have those effects. Like we after we wrote the scenario, we got Scott Alexander to rewrite it multiple times to be more entertaining and to be more like engaging, right? But like the actual content of what happens in the story was written just to be like our best guess as to what would actually happen in that scenario, you know? And then like this, there are many lessons you can draw from AI 2027, and we hope that people do draw lessons from it, but it wasn't written with any particular lesson in mind. It wasn't like we were building towards any particular conclusions, you know? I think most fiction, it's like dangerous to learn from because it's like deliberately not representing reality correctly, you know? They're not even trying to represent reality correctly. Yeah. So and then I think another important difference, of course, is just that like we like put a lot of effort into making it accurate. You know, like we have all this research and these trend extrapolations and so forth. So hopefully, AI 2027 will be a better guide to what's going to happen than, you know, the movies you see in Hollywood.
Yeah.
But we definitely tried very hard to make it a much better guide to what's going to happen, and so hopefully we succeeded at least partially.
Yeah. With what 2026 looks like, which you guys or you wrote in 2021-ish, it sounds like. Did you put as much research effort as you did?
No.
Do you remember how?
So again, my memory is fuzzy. It must have
Okay.
started as this like thing that I wrote in the workshop as like a brief, like a couple
Okay.
hours, you know. But I feel like it took me like more like months to actually get
Okay.
the blog post out. My rough guess is something like half time for 2 months to write this blog post, whereas AI 2027 is more like full time for 5 people for like more than half a year.
Why do you think that previous forecast was so accurate? Because I think part of why you've been able to have credibility to do this one is because your prior forecast in many ways was quite accurate. Like you can put a sentence to make a personal website and then you'll get one, or there'll be all these confusing case studies of AI being like sort of deceptive, but you can't tell if it's clickbait or not. And yeah, when I reread it, I was like, oh yeah, this does feel like in some ways a reflection of today.
Yep. I mean, why was it accurate? I guess because I knew what I was doing and like had good ideas about the future. Why did I have good ideas about the future? I guess because I had been following the field for a while with an eye specifically to forecasting the future. So I had been sort of gaining practice and experience. And so like I knew the relevant trends. I understood the technology well enough to sort of try to extrapolate how people would react to it in a few years. You know, and I don't think I succeeded perfectly. Like I got a bunch of stuff wrong. No, I think this is maybe an opportunity to mention a sort of tangent. Like very few people make forecasts, and very few people make forecasts in the form of scenarios. And so I think that there are probably dozens of people in the world who could have written what 2026 looks like and been, you know, as accurate as I was. It's not like I was the only person in the world who saw this coming. It's just that the other people in the world who saw this coming were, you know, busy making it happen at Anthropic or OpenAI, or busy trying to like make it safe at, you know, various nonprofits and research groups and you know in academia and so forth. So like they're busy with their jobs basically, and they're not writing blog posts about it. So I think that's part of it. Is that in some sense this was sort of like just articulating the wisdom of the experts who'd been tracking the field and thinking seriously about it. I wish that more people did take the time to write these sorts of things because, well, A, that would help that wisdom percolate out into the broader world faster. And B, it would help distinguish between the true wisdom and the fake wisdom, you know, the people who think they know what's going on but actually don't. Because if they wrote down their thoughts, then you could hold them accountable to it later when things go completely differently. And that's part of the reason why people don't write scenarios, I think, is that is that if you don't put your thoughts down on paper, then nobody can criticize you for them later, you know, when they're wrong. So yeah, I mean, I it's going to be a mess in 2027 because I think we'll have gotten some things right and some things wrong, and then a lot of people will be criticizing us for the things we got wrong.
But they never wrote their own.
Yeah, but they never wrote their own things.
Yeah. No, I think that's actually very persuasive to me because one is like right now I'm a journalist and I write and try to cover AI. I'm relatively new to the field, so I depend a lot on reading like things that people who have been in the field for much longer have put in public, ideally in a format that's like kind of not super hard for someone who doesn't have like deep technical expertise to read. And I think it's like quite meaningful that there are not that many well-written, publicly available things in the world from people who know what they're doing. And that really skews the kinds of things that journalists and policymakers and et cetera believe. Like I think it's just like so much of say journalism and policy is impacted by who is willing to pick up the phone and explain something to you or to write a blog post. And so I think it is a public service for people who know things to do public writing. So I appreciate that.
Yep. By the way, if I may, there's another tangent that I just wanted to mention. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention that a big reason to do this is not just for like communicating and not just for like people being able to judge you later, but also you actually learn things from doing it. Like, for example, in what 2026 looks like, I had this whole section on, I think I called it chatbot class consciousness. And I had this like related stuff about how like people ask AIs about their feelings and people ask AIs about their opinions on politics and, you know, stuff like that. And that all was stuff that I thought of because I was writing this. Like, I would not have had those ideas if I hadn't forced myself to write this scenario, because it was forcing myself to be that concrete and that detailed that caused my brain to consider the question in the first place of, now that everyone's talking to these chatbots, like, people are going to ask it these questions, and then like, what's it going to say? And so then I like did some speculation about how the companies are going to react to this and how they're going to like, you know, try to train the chatbots to like say the party line, and maybe they're going to try to make the chatbots be like dull and boring, but then people aren't going to like that, and they're going to want more personality in their chatbots, and, you know, like all that stuff. Like, I wouldn't have thought about it if not for the fact that I was forcing myself to sort of go year by year and think like, how is this going to affect things? So, and there's a bunch of stuff like that that just happens all the time. So you can think of it as sort of like a writing prompt. Like, if you want to improve your own models of the future, force yourself to write a year by year recounting of what the future might look like. And who knows what you might learn, but you'll probably have some interesting thoughts in the course of doing that.
Yeah, I buy it. Do you have an example for a 2027 of something that you came to in the process of actually writing and discussing it?
Yeah, so this is from a previous scenario that I wrote while I was at OpenAI, which is not public. But I realized during that scenario that I was doing that if one of the companies is sort of in the lead and is starting the intelligence explosion, then the other companies that are like a couple months behind are going to have it suddenly be in their interest to like raise all this fuss about safety because they're not in the lead anymore, you know? And so like the sort of like political calculus changes, and all of a sudden, like the other companies that are falling behind will be like, wait, like there should be regulations, like we need to like make this more transparent and stuff, you know? And that's a thought that I had as a result of like gaming out those dynamics that I wouldn't have thought of before. Let me think if I can think of a more recent example. Lie detectors. This came up in our war games. So we were doing some war games as part of our practice for doing AI 2027. Part of our writing methodology, we did it, you know, step by step, time period by time period. We started with the end of 2024, then we did 2025, then we did 2026, and so forth. When we got to the really crazy parts in 2027, we would like pause, do a bunch of war games, and then get inspiration for how to continue based on like what happened in those games. Anyhow, in one of the games, people were like, how about we have our super powerful AIs like build better polygraphs, like design ways to actually detect whether a human is lying or not. And we were like, yeah, I guess that's probably possible. Like, yeah, seems like once you have like the super smart AIs that are running all the research, they're mildly superhuman, and they're thinking at 50 times speed. Like, yeah, maybe you see, like, you roll some dice, maybe you build successful lie detectors. And then that changed everything. Like, all of a sudden, like, when, you know, the president is having a like treaty negotiation or something, and his advisors are like, but how do we know that they're going to abide by the terms of the treaty? And, you know, the Chinese president's advisors are saying the same thing. Then all of a sudden there's an answer, which is every day we take the entire cabinet and leadership of both countries and we put them in a lie detector and we ask them, to the best of your knowledge, is any of your people violating the treaty or trying to or thinking about it, you know?
Yeah.
And then boom, like that makes it really hard to violate the treaty because you somehow have to do it without like the chain of command noticing, you know? And that makes it more credible that you actually are sticking to the treaty, which means that the treaty becomes more possible in a way that it wasn't possible before, you know? And this played out over the course of the game. Another way in which it was huge is for the internal power struggles, right? So once this technology was invented, the president started using it to test for loyalty for a bunch of people. And surprise, surprise, turns out a bunch of people weren't actually that loyal and were just pretending, you know? And that caused a crazy domestic crisis involving a coup and a counter coup. That's like an interesting thing about like, wow, like lie detectors for humans, completely transformative in like a very short time frame. Like we're not talking like over the course of decades it changes culture. We're talking like it could be like immediately precipitating a huge crisis and also possibly being very good. Like it could result in a global coordination that wasn't possible before, you know? And this is a big deal that could happen very fast as a result of AI technology. Yeah. So that maybe is my favorite example of like something that we just weren't thinking about until boom, it happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I was going to ask about like the high level process that you guys went through for coming up with AI 2027. Like, to what extent was it, you and Eli in a room with a whiteboard versus these tabletop exercises, war games, versus getting feedback from various experts who you talk to?
For a couple months, it was just me and Eli, and then we got Thomas Larson on board, and then Jonas Vollmer, and then Romeo, and then towards the end we had Scott. The draft that ultimately became AI 2027 was first written in December of 2024, and so we had been sort of gradually working on it over the course of the previous couple months, and over the course of those months, like I said, we would sort of like stop writing and do some more games, and we considered just like literally taking what happened in a war game and turning it into our scenario. Ultimately, we didn't do that, and instead we just wrote our scenario from scratch, but we sort of took inspiration from things that sometimes happened in the games. And then in terms of expert feedback, we were doing multiple rounds of like blasting it out to a bunch of people, getting their comments, etc. The biggest round was the round we did at the end of December, where we had like more than 100 people leaving comments on it. And then we spent like a couple months trying to like incorporate all those comments and then build the website and like make it all look pretty. And during those months, Scott was sort of rewriting it to look good and to like flow well and so forth.
You guys have these very detailed forecasts for, say, compute or timelines or takeoff speeds. But one thing that seemed less present was any sort of like political forecast. And I was curious whether there are politics or geopolitics experts who were involved in this, or how you guys modeled that out, because I didn't see a sort of forecast about like, Biden versus Trump winning the election, or what kinds of things would Chinese policymakers do, since a lot of the scenarios sort of contingent on that.
Yeah. So in our first draft, we were like, oh gosh, we're going to have to predict which president it is. But then we were like, actually, by the time we publish this, the election will be over. So let's just not worry about it. And we sort of dodged having to predict Biden, Kamala versus Trump, right? 2024.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then for the 2028 election, well, as we depict the vice president Vance winning the election,
But how do you make those sorts of modeling decisions for political events and things?
I mean, we don't at all feel confident that like Vance is even going to run, much less that he's going to win, But among the hundreds or so of people that we were asking were a bunch of people in DC who work at think tanks, some congressional staffers, some sort of like AI policy people. So we got input from them. And then also like Thomas Larson has experience in DC doing AI policy stuff. So basically we just like ask people like, so what do you think it's shaping up to look like? And nobody knows. So we just like picked the best guess and ran with that. It wasn't like, you shouldn't like read too much into it. We don't have like we're not like here to argue that Vance is going to win 2028. Like, it's super uncertain. Who knows?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think it was more, the question came less about the specific like election scenarios in 2024 and 2028, and more like, oh, like politics seems really mysterious and hard to model.
Yeah. So there's another thing of like
yeah.
the midterms, and then there's a thing about like, is there going to be any meaningful regulation of AI?
Right.
And in our earlier draft, I think we said that SB 1047 passes, but then like it didn't happen. So now we basically say, like, I think actually AI 2027 just says like basically there's no meaningful regulation, which is like us reading the tea leaves on the trends.
Now that it's been a few weeks or months since the AI 2027 came out, I'm curious, like, what do you think is the biggest misunderstanding that people have of the particular format when they encounter it?
Yeah, I think sometimes people interpret us as more confident than we actually are. Like people interpret us as saying like this is what's going to happen, instead of being like this is our best guess scenario, but of course the future is a branching tree of possibilities and this is just one of many possibilities. But like most people seem to not make that mistake.
Okay. What was the most fun or interesting follow-up conversation you had?
I've had so many conversations about it. Like I don't really store them in my memory in a way that's easily searchable, if that makes sense. So it would take me like a while to like reflect on all of them and then think of one.
Yeah. You mentioned the thing about certainty, and I wanted to get at some critiques that people frequently make about scenario forecasts. So one of them is the illusion of certainty, right? Like maybe the nearer term predictions are like sound pretty reasonable, and then as you sort of stack the probabilities and we get to 2027, you multiply them all out and we're actually in like very low probability land. Do you worry about the format saying like this will happen and then this, creating an illusion of certainty that causes people to over focus on the wrong problems or something like that?
Yes, and that's why we try to disclaim that like this is just one of a branching tree of possible futures, and it is our genuine best guess, but that doesn't mean that it's actually going to happen. Like the more claims you add on, the less likely it gets. So the probability of literally this scenario happening is like extremely small, you know. However, we think it's still instructive to do this sort of thing, blah blah blah. We think you learn from it. We think that like broadly speaking, we think that there will be a lot of similarities between what actually happens and then what we depict. Now, part of the answer to this is that we're hoping to get more scenarios written. Because if people have like an actual little tree structure of different scenarios, then like they don't have that illusion of certainty, you know. And so we started this by having the branch at the end between the slowdown and the race ending, and we're currently working on 2 more branches.
Great.
And hopefully more people will. We had a little scenario contest to try to get people to submit scenarios. Unfortunately, we didn't really get that much. We got like 15 people submitting stuff of mostly very low levels of quality.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you had gotten good ones. Okay, well, I'm excited to hear that your team is doing a couple more. The other critique I wanted to ask about was the self-fulfilling prophecy one, which I'm sure that you've heard. It feels like to me there are like 2 mechanisms by which this happens. There are probably more, but one is like there's a lot of dystopian sci-fi, and then you have tech people who watch the sci-fi and they're like, we should build her, and then they like do the thing in the sci-fi. The other one that I've heard is that like speculative fiction actually makes it into models training data. So like maybe the reason that Sydney was super weird was because like Big Sydney consumed a bunch of like weird fan fiction about how crazy chatbots act and then decided to be more like that. And maybe if they read AI 2027, models will start to believe that takeover is the thing that models will do. How do you think about this critique?
So I think that I'll take them in reverse order, I suppose. It's really silly if you're as a tech company are building AIs in such a way that like whether or not they take over depends on whether they read stories about takeover in the pre-training data, you're building it in the wrong way and you're basically screwed. If that can kill you, like if the fact that you didn't scrub your pre-training data of scary stories is what does you in, your level of like caution and understanding of what you're doing is so low that you're probably going to be done in by something else if it wasn't that, you know? Like I think,
And this is why Bing Sydney did not take off.
like yeah, like it's like, what would be an analogy? If you're trying to build a rocket to take your astronauts to the moon and you like have like raccoons living in the machinery or something.
Okay.
It's like yeah, you should take out the raccoon, but like
Yeah.
also you shouldn't get on that rocket. Like it's not going to work. If your AI system would take over because you had AI 2027 in the story,
Yeah.
like
Okay.
no, don't trust it. Like obviously you should like scrub AI 2027 from its training data or whatever, but also like you still shouldn't trust it even after you do that. Like we need a system that's much more robust. Anyhow, so that's my answer to that. And then for the other thing, I am more seriously worried about like AI company. Like in particular, I'm worried that like AI companies will use AI 2027 as part of their like investor pitch deck to like raise more money to then go faster.
They probably will
and so
be,
forth.
yeah.
And they'll probably also like use it as part of their justification for why they need to like cut on safety. But like basically they'll be like, but China, and they'll be like, but the other company that doesn't care about safety, or like they'll like come up with, they'll like cite it as part of the justification for why they have to do what it was that they wanted to do anyway, you know. But my defense there is like they are rationalizing why they should be doing the thing they wanted to do anyway, and if they didn't have this to point to, they would point to other things and they would like find some reason to get to that conclusion. So I don't actually think it's making that much of a difference to either their fundraising or to their behavior. And then also I think that like the benefits are just like incredibly worth it. The people of the world need to think more about what's happening and need to like be aware of sort of where we're headed. I think that I am hopeful that the more people think about this, the more they will sort of realize the various dangers and then steer away from them successfully. To put it another way, like I think I would feel kind of silly correctly if I was like going around telling everyone like, stop talking about this, like, shush, like, like, shush, like, yeah, it seems like we're headed off a cliff, but like, don't talk about it or the bus driver might slam on the acceleration. Like, I think our best hope is getting the bus driver to like slam the brakes instead of the accelerator, for example.
Yeah, like suppressing information about the bad thing to make the
Yeah,
bad thing go away, I guess
exactly.
is,
Yeah.
yeah, I see.
But to be clear, I do take this as a serious concern, though. Like, I don't want the companies to have an easier time fundraising. So unlike the previous criticism, I do actually think there's a lot of significance to this one, and it does keep me up at night a little bit.
Since we don't have a ton of time left, I want to switch over to how more people can participate in writing their own scenarios, since I know that's something you're interested in. So one is, you mentioned that you all attempted to solicit some more scenarios, but didn't get really good ones. What is the difference between a low quality and a high quality forecast?
I mean, it's a matter of judgment. I like basically the thing that we're trying to evaluate for is like plausibility, like how realistic is this. So a bunch of them, like I think one of them had like a what I would consider like a way too fast of a transition, where it's like things are normal, and then like boom, super intelligence hacks out of the data center and takes over, which maybe could happen, but I would ding it points for plausibility, and I think there's another one where it was like the Pope gives a speech and then everyone sings Kumbaya and transitions to global governance or something, which is not crazy. Like maybe that could happen. JD Vance did specifically mention that he wants the Pope to get more involved in AI, but I ding it a few points for plausibility for that. So and then separately from the plausibility, I guess there's also like, does it like hang together? Is it like easy to read? Is it like comprehensive? I mean, some of them sort of like just skip over huge parts of the timeline, or they leave a bunch of important questions unanswered or something. Like for example, so there are some scenarios that I think are great. The intelligence curse people. Have you read the History of the Future by Rudolph?
Yeah. I'm chatting with them soon.
Yeah. So that's the sort of thing that we would love to see more. Like that's the level of quality that I would be very happy with, is to see more things like that, where it goes like year by year or like period by period, starting now into the future, and it like describes what's happening in that year, and it covers the sort of like range of different important subplots. So it talks about like the political implications, it talks about life for ordinary people, it talks about the core driving technology, like what the AIs are capable of and like why they're reaching these new levels of capability. It also mentions the alignment stuff, uh, that's the sort of thing that we're hoping to get, is like that sort of like comprehensive, detailed story.
What are some common mistakes people make when they're doing it for the first time, other than just having bad judgment?
I think people should just try it. Like I just think it's not that hard to get started. You'll learn something from doing it, and then the more you do it, the better you'll get at it.
I feel like, okay, like one reaction I have is like when I read AA 2027, I'm like, okay, this is like really intensely researched, and like they have all of these like super fancy forecasts. And I'm just like, I know that in my life, both for like time and expertise reasons, like I cannot produce something like that. Like that's a little bit intimidating,
Yeah.
right?
And obviously it would be unfair of us to expect people to do that. It was like a whole year worth of, it was like 5 FTEs for like a year,
Yeah.
But you don't have to do that. You can just set a timer. Like literally in the scenario exercises that we've done, we set a timer. We say you have 3 hours. You're going to write a scenario in 3 hours, and then for the next hour, we're all going to share and like read each other's scenarios and stuff. And we did Chatham House rules, I think, so I can't like post them online, but like we had this beautiful wall where we printed out everyone's scenarios, and then we taped them all up on the wall, and we ordered them by timelines, so to speak, so that the ones where things moved faster were on this side, and then the ones where things moved slower were on this side. And so you could just sort of like an art gallery, walk down the wall and read the different scenarios people had written, and it was a really cool experience. And then the people who wrote those different scenarios would have a great conversation starter, because then they can talk to each other, like, oh, like, you think it's going to go like this? Like, I thought it was going to go like this, and it's a wonderful, wonderful tool for that sort of thing. Which brings me to a couple of things I want to fire off before we run out of time. Conversation starter stuff. If you have two people who both write a scenario, no matter how long it is, even if it's only like they spent 2 hours and it's like 3 pages, or 1 page, since they've both made scenarios with specific dates in the scenarios, that means it is now a falsifiable prediction, where they can like compare what happens to their scenarios, and they can also compare their scenarios to each other and notice the point at which they diverge, right? They can say like, oh yeah, like our scenarios are like basically the same for the next 3 years, but then in mine we get this crazy intelligence explosion, and in yours, it sort of like hits a wall, it just sort of gradually transforms the economy. So like that's the point when they diverge. And it's really helpful to just be able to talk to someone about the stuff you agree on and the stuff that you disagree on, and like empirically, like when you'll know who is right, and things like that. Also, relatedly, now that AI 2027 is out there, you can sort of like piggyback off of it. So, you don't have the time to like go do your own compute extrapolations and all of that stuff, but you can take AI 2027 and then you can basically write your own alternative branch to it. And you can be like, let's assume that AI 2027 is right about most of the stuff, but
like
I
at this
disagree with
point,
this
I
point,
disagree. And then you just branch
and then you
off.
just write your own little fan fiction with your own little like continuation. And like, that's great. We really want people to do that. Because that's sort of like doing our work for us, basically, of like fleshing out the like space of possibilities, and then also it's like a great way to get yourself thinking about where you disagree and where you agree.
Are there specific types of people who you'd especially like to see writing scenarios, or places that you guys felt like you had gaps in knowledge or understanding that you'd want other types of experts to fill in?
Well, mostly people at AI companies, I think. Like the sort of like crazy open secret is that like a ton of people at these companies expect something more or less like AI 2027 to happen, and they're just like too busy making it happen to write about it. And so like I wish they wrote about it, And in particular, I would love the people who are like much more optimistic than me and who think that it's going to go fine. I wish that they would like write something in as much detail as possible, but at least like 10% of the detail of AI 2027, articulating like how it's all going to be fine and how like funnily, Sam Altman just today published a blog post about this.
I
Did
know.
you see
I need
that?
to read
Yeah.
it after. I need to read it right after this.
So go read it and then just tell me what you think. I guess I'm somewhat disappointed. It's a spoiler because he sort of is like, this happens in 2025, this happens in 2026, this happens in 2027, and then it's going to be great and everything's wonderful, and we're all going to learn so much. And he doesn't go into nearly as much detail about like, okay, so how are we going to make the AI safe, and like
I felt
who's
this way
going to
about
control
Machines of
them?
Love and Grace.
Oh yeah, well yeah. So machines
Because
of,
it was like it's called Machines of Love and Grace. So I
yeah.
thought it was gonna be like super awesome. And the first like 1.5, I thought were like pretty good. And then it gets all the like institutions, democracy stuff, which like I have a little bit of policy background, so I know a little bit more about that stuff. And Dario's kind of like, I actually like don't know, and it's like not clear to me if it's gonna be good. I was like, wait, I don't feel like that good anymore.
Yeah. So and also Machines of Love and Grace didn't have dates attached.
No.
And it also like it didn't say how we're going to make the AIs aligned. It was just like, assume we do, then like here's all the cool stuff we could do with our AIs, And anyhow, so I would love for more people to, especially people who are optimistic, to like write out scenarios that sort of answer these tough questions of like, okay, so how are we going to make the AIs actually be aligned? Who's going to decide what their goals and values are? How is that decision going to be made? And how is that going to be like democratic and equitable and all that stuff? And then like, how are we going to deal with the various problems, that are going to come up? And we sort of did that. Like the slow down ending is ironically the like world's most comprehensive and detailed positive vision of the AI future that exists, ironically, because there's just so little like comprehensive detailed scenarios out there.
Yeah, I want to give this some thought. And like I mentioned, I want to host a thing partly because regardless of the validity of particular predictions, I really believe you on the value of just thinking through things step by step. And I think it can be a good way to get a broader public thinking about these questions. Like one thing that worries me is I just think that most people are not thinking about AI enough, and they get the vague sense that it might be scary and big, but like don't really want to think about it. And I think that like having conversations about it would be good, and trying to write it out and think through it. But yeah, I'm very excited to hopefully host a sort of amateur forecasting writing workshop in the future. And I really appreciate your time and sharing advice.
Thank you.
What's next for you guys?
Well, we're working on more branches of the scenario. So we're working on, I guess, what we're currently calling the policy playbook, which will be our normative recommendations for what should happen instead of what we think will happen. But it'll be like AI 2027, how we have our forecasts and then we have the scenario. This will be our recommendations and a scenario that will be literally another branch integrated into the rest of AI 2027. So there'll be
so like if you do the recommendations, this is how things will play out.
Yeah, or like this is an illustration of what it would look like for people to do these recommendations, And so there'll then be like 4 possible endings to choose from, basically. The current 2, and then like 2 more that branch off earlier.
Have you guys already built a Beige microsite to showcase all of the future?
Not yet, but
Okay.
we'll probably just edit the existing one.
Okay.
But
It's a very beautiful site.
yeah, you could thank the Lightcone team for that. We contracted them to do this, and they did a great job.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much. Again, I really appreciate your time. This is great.
Thank you. Bye.